ブルマークの怪獣シリーズなのだ。
レーシングカーだ。
スピードコントローラーでぐんぐん走るミニカードライブゲームなのだ。
お子様の夢を育てるブルマーク。プッチンプリンをどうぞ。プティコプッチンプリン。
Hey, and why hello. Welcome to another one of our fabulous group chat episodes of Collect All Monsters. This one dealing with vintage Kaiju vinyl. Super fast. Let's go around the room, and I will welcome my co-host, David Dopko from Seattle.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. This is going to be a fun one. Looking forward to it. How are you today, John?
I'm doing great, David. Minasan, yokoso. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all in these days. It's good to be back together. And it's great to have our co-host, Christine. How are you?
Finally! Hi, guys. I'm super excited to finally be in the show from my own collection room. As you can see, I have internet! Real internet! So, really excited to be able to join you guys finally from my own room. And I am super excited to talk to our guests that we have for the show.
What a
Two of my favorite
wonderful
people.
segue, actually, Christine, because I would like to introduce our first guest right now, Mike Johnson, who I did not actually meet until one of those annual G-Fest festivals. Mike Johnson's not just a collector of Kaiju vinyl and Kaiju vinyl toys. He's one half of the team behind Club Tokyo, the internet's oldest and best reference for Godzilla and Kaiju toys. The site has been taken down as of pretty recently, but thankfully that's a temporary situation. Club Tokyo is coming back. It will be relaunched. Mike, thank you so much for joining us here. And how goes the work on the updated website, dude? I understand you've been taking a lot of photos of your collection.
Yeah, a lot of photos, a lot of web redesign. A lot more data connections between the different types of items. A lot of work.
Right on.
Great to appreciate it someday.
Well, welcome to the show. And let's get our next guest here right now. That is Mr. Sean Linkenback. Sean is hailing from the ATL and one of the larger names in Godzilla Collectibles, at least the community, for a number of reasons. One, he literally wrote the book on Godzilla Collectibles back in 1996. Yep. And as we talked about in our last episode, the poster book we referenced quite a few times. He had the price guide that we just showed, 2014, published The Art of Japanese Monsters. Sean used to have a shop in Atlanta called Showcase Collectibles, which has sort of turned into Showcase Daikaiju, an online shop for fans of the films with more than just figures, but also books, posters, and more. Sean's going to actually be part of next weekend's Kaiju Masterclass with the presentation of classic giant monster posters with fellow collector and Godzilla historian Ed Godziszewski. Welcome to Collect All Monsters, Sean. I'm looking forward to moderating that panel, actually.
Wow, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Sean, how's everything going with Showcase Daikaiju these days?
Well, as good as can be expected, I guess, with no G-Fest. Like everybody, we were looking forward to the show, and sad that it didn't happen this year, and hope that it's going to be a thing next year. But online sales have been very good this year. People are people haven't stopped collecting, that's for sure. We'll just leave it at that.
Right. Now, before we really kick things into gear in terms of the super serious toy talk, let's actually say hello to all the people who've tuned in. We got 38 people watching live on both YouTube and Facebook. I want to say hi to Yeti Punk, who was the first one here. Tim Outen. Let's see. Pat Levy's here. Helmy's here. Jordan. John Parkinson. Stacy is watching from Facebook. Jonathan Grissetti is from Facebook. Gojira 851's over here on YouTube. Albert Escobedo. Demon by Design. David Robertson. Kaiju Battle. What's up, Mike? Jonathan Portman. Let's see. Sandra Chambers. Leslie's wife is here, even though Leslie can't be with us. And we also got, let's see. Yeah, Jordan's asking for the Japanese vintage vinyl Facebook group roll call, which I don't know if I'm a member of that yet. Maybe I'll check that out later. Anyway, we got a lot of people here. Richard Cox is in the chat as well. Roger Harkarvi. And oh my gosh, I think that's everybody. I think Nick Sides is there too. You know, this is always my favorite part of the show when I try and read everybody's name from the chat. Jedi, Granvell, Showa Goji 75, and Alex Meredick. And that's it. I'm done for now. Let's shift things back over to our guests real quick. Mike, can you tell me a little bit just about how you got involved in collecting and how you got to be where you are today?
Sure. I mean, I was never much of a collector as I was growing up. And then post-college, when I came home, a friend of mine bought me my first Godzilla toy. It was actually just a Trendmasters piece. And that kind of just started me off on collecting. I never actually envisioned being a collector myself, but from there it's been all downhill, and I just can't seem to get enough or stop, pretty much.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive. How about you, Sean? What was your intro?
For vinyl or collecting? Wow, I mean, my intro was probably finding things for Godzilla 1985 when that was in the theater. I was lucky enough to see Megalon in the movie theater, but I didn't get a comic book at the time or any of the buttons or anything like that. And it was really Godzilla 85 when I started becoming aware of some of the Japanese memorabilia and merchandise that was released for that.
When did it ruin your life, though? That's, I guess, really the question I have.
It ruined. It ruined my life when I saw a poster for Godzilla versus Biollante.
Wow. Okay.
Best movie.
It had been, you know, up until that point, it had just been a few things here and there, and you buy stuff, and that's neat, and that's great. And then when I saw that was my first Japanese poster. And that really put the light bulb on, and it's been all downhill since then.
Do you want to brag about any of the pieces that are on the wall back there? I specifically know there's two pieces we'd love to at least call out. Speaking of the Godzilla, the Polish Godzilla poster, dude. That's amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is.
Poland's sense of aesthetic on posters is very unique.
It is, and I feel fortunate, of course, I've actually had that since about 1993.
Wow.
So that's been in the collection for a very long time. The piece next to it, which, well, actually that's Rodin there. The other piece next to it, which maybe that's the one you want to talk about.
Yeah.
The newer entry. That's the original artwork for the Godzilla 2000 poster.
Wow.
Fantastic.
It's beautiful.
All right, so I think it's time for us to really get into the nitty gritty, gentlemen and lady, and specifically for Mike and specifically for Sean. I would love to know. Well, actually, David, I'll let you field that question.
Sure. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of casually ask you questions as the conversation sort of goes on, and then we'd like to hear the perspective from both Mike and from you, Sean. So I'm going to start it off with a question that a lot of people wanted me to ask, and this is a question that I have too. What defines a vintage figure for you?
I'm glad Mike's going first.
All right, yeah.
I'll talk at once now.
Pressure's on, Mike.
It's always kind of the question in collecting: what does vintage actually mean? For me, it starts off from when I first collected and things that I considered vintage back then. is what I consider vintage. So that'd basically be the Bulmark, the Marzons up to the Popies, and actually the early Bandais to the late 70s as well. But I guess nowadays you can consider the old 90s Bandais would be qualified as vintage by some people. But to me, it doesn't have a feeling of vintage because they weren't vintage when I started. They were relatively new toys back then.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's kind of a hard subject because it's kind of different for everybody, really.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. It's definitely a personal feeling that you get when you started collecting and what you got from the beginning of your journey, what you consider vintage. But I know there's some. Are there any specific like rules? Like, okay, anything from 1985 past is considered to be vintage, or is it just definitely up to the individual to what they consider to be vintage?
I thought someone actually came up with a definition. I forget whether it's 20 or 30 years. Anything that's 20 or 30 years old by definition in the collecting paradigm, not even outside, is considered vintage. I forget the exact number of years, but I don't know. Like I said, to me, it's just personal. I don't really.
How about you, Sean?
Kind of along the lines of Mike, I think the easiest definition is anything that was older than when you started collecting. So.
I like that.
anything that's come out since you started is new. Anything that existed before you started, you're probably going to consider vintage. And I'm going to hold up a guy that go along with Mike. You know, it's hard to consider Bandai's vintage. This, to me, is one of the best Bandai figures, the 91 Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
This figure this year is now as old as the original Marathon vinyl Godzilla was at the time of the first G-Con.
Wow.
So, when you think about that from 1966 to 1995 is 29 years, this guy is now 29 years old also. It's like, wow. I can't possibly think as this guy is vintage, but I had no problem thinking of that Marathon Godzilla as being vintage. So it's just a mindset of it came before I started, so it must be old, it must be vintage. But the fact is, this is just as old as the Marathon was when I thought that was vintage.
That's an incredible answer from both of you, because something that is something that is before you started your collecting journey that came out is considered vintage. Anything afterwards is considered to be current or a newer piece. I love that. That's perfect.
That's highly perspectival too. Like it's just absolutely customizable to when you as a collector started your journey. That's pretty rad.
Yeah. I like it. Not
on a tree
here, but I like it.
All right. So I guess I would ask, sort of as a follow-up to David's question, in terms of like when or what's your definition of vintage, I would say like what are some like really great examples in your opinion of some vintage figures, guys? Mike, I'll start with Mike this time.
Why do I gotta go first?
I'll switch it up next time for you, dude.
I mean, I guess, to me, it's the early Marzon and Bullmarks, either the Ultra Q series to the first Godzilla and so forth. Like I said, I don't get into many paper goods, and I know the paper stuff kind of preceded a lot of the vinyl toys originally. But yeah, I guess that's it. I don't know.
How about you, Sean?
I'm probably going to pair Mike's answer there about the toys, and I agree. You know, when we focus on the toys only, especially we look at Japanese toys, we're missing over a decade's worth of collectibles. We have the entire time period of 1954 to 1966, really, before any vinyl toys came out. But there's a world still of collectibles that came out during that time period. If you're looking at books, at manga, you've got the first Karuta card game in there. You know, even for America, you've got the Ideal game in there, and of course the Aurora kit. So there's a bunch of stuff that's existed before vinyl, and I like that time period a lot. Of course, I mean, to me, getting a movie poster from the 1950s that's Godzilla, that's as close to the origin as you can get.
I agree. That's great.
Christine had a question about those early ones as well.
So, what are some of the earliest vinyl figures that were produced in Japan and in the US? I'll start with Sean this time.
Well, the Marathon vinyl, of course, is the very first vinyl figure. We can get into an argument over is plastic vinyl or not, because it is. I mean, the Aurora kit is plastic, which is a type of vinyl. There you go. That's one of those is a Marathon. The other one's a Bullmark. But that's the very first. So in 66, Marathon released Godzilla, Ebirah, and Mothra for the Sea Monster movie. Those are the first 3 vinyls.
Oh, wow. And what about in the U.S.?
In the
There
U.S.,
was the Aurora kit, wasn't it?
the Aurora kit's a model kit that came out in 1964 and really was the inspiration for Marathon to start making toys. Its success kind of took the Japanese by surprise, and they quickly rushed into production their own version of that kit and in a tin toy. And those were the first Japanese toys that you could play with that were released, and then they started the vinyl not too long after that. For an actual figure that you could play with in America, we did not get anything until the mid 70s, and it would either be, if you classify the Shogun Godzilla as a vinyl toy because it's plastic, then that would be the first. If not, then it's going to be the Popey version of the Godzilla gang figure. So 78 is when America finally got a first vinyl toy.
Nice.
So I actually had a question about that. If you look at American toys, like the Godzilla gang stuff or the Shogun guy, these are nostalgic for people who grew up with them. I just happen to have these props on hand, guys.
Convenient.
So these are nostalgic for people who grew up with them like us. But I'm wondering, what is the draw for both of you guys, Sean and Mike? What's the draw for Japanese vinyl over American releases? And I'll also start with Sean this time.
Well, really, you should go with Mike. He's got a much larger Japanese collection than me, and I actually tend to focus on vintage American goods. But I do have a selection of Japanese ones, and I guess I'll go for what I feel are the more important or key pieces out of that. So yeah, and we'll probably get into this much later, but I think the Marathon Godzilla is actually surprisingly affordable compared to so much that happens today. If you look at when the 90s, when the conventions started, there was organized collecting, of course, 20 years before that, but the 90s really started to bring everything together, and the internet made, of course, everybody much closer.
Oh, yeah.
The prices on figures then were not that dramatically different than today. The X Plus figures that come out today are as much or more than a lot of the vintage figures. So if you can afford an X Plus figure, you can afford to collect vintage. It's pretty simple, and that makes it affordable for everybody, really.
That's
Cool
that's
answer.
that's a good way to put it.
It's
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah, it's true.
Mike, do you have an answer for that too?
What was the question?
Basically, if I could understand the nostalgic connection to some of the stuff that came out here in the States, but what's the draw for you as a collector, specifically for the Japanese vintage style or the Japanese vintage figures? Since you didn't grow up in Japan in the 70s.
Oh yeah, and I had no connection to them, obviously. I mean, I guess I've heard they were all over San Francisco and stuff. I guess I was just acclimating into the hobby, and the more I got into the hobby, the more my appreciation grew for them. And some of it just kind of stemmed with a lot of the newer stuff. And sorry to people, it gets a little bit boring. There's something about chasing something that was actually a toy that's actually part of history that has more stuff to it to me than just chasing the latest lottery figure that someone's putting up on the web with 15 made just to draw business to it. I mean, I guess it's really the history, and part of it's just the hunting for something that you know is not going to be reproduced too.
Interesting you say that though, right? Because I know you can't technically reproduce that nostalgic feel, but there are so many reproduction figures and reissue figures. I'm going to sort of skip ahead and say most of the figures that I have in my collection that look like they could be vintage figure are actually reissues from M1 or Maru-san or even Bullmark today. So does that still hold true to you? Has it turned into a less about the reproducing it and more about the owning that history? Is that pretty much on point for both of you guys?
It is for me.
All right.
I'll jump
Sure,
in.
Sean, you go for it.
Mike seems a little bit shy there, so I'll jump in. Yes, it's definitely about the history for me. Because obviously, like Mike said, we don't have a connection to the Japanese toys growing up. There are definitely some older collectors that do. You know, the August Vergonias and the Alex Walds were buying that stuff back in the 70s when it was new. I don't have that connection, but I understand and appreciate it. And of course, we can get into it more later. Anybody that's watched Godzilla versus the Smog Monster has a little bit of a connection to the vintage. If you're like me, you thought that was prop that they made for the movie. I had no idea that was an actual toy that you could buy in a store until many years later.
And what a toy, right?
Yeah, that scene was influential to so many of us, and I thought it was a prop too. And you know, before I thought I could afford a vintage piece, I actually picked up the B Club repro of that Godzilla that goes down the sliding board along with the Marathon or Bullmark. I can't tell which one it was. And actually, I think I got this from Mike Johnson, you know, a long time ago, and it's almost the same coloration as the one that they used in the film. John Ruffin actually just recently got a vintage piece from Mandarake, I believe, and that's
this is from Sean himself.
Oh, that's John.
Thank you. You made my dreams come true on this one.
Daikaiju. Boy, did I screw that one up. Oh my goodness.
Even better than Mandarake.
Yeah, even better than Mandarake right here. Real quick, you're talking about your connection with these and the Japanese versus the American. I just think that, you know, as a toy collector, I started probably in the late 90s. I'm sorry, the early 90s when I lived in New York City, and it sort of escalated. And it really escalated when I moved to San Francisco. And I met Mike, and Linda Conrad from Chibi Goji Toys really helped me get a lot of my first pieces in my collection. And anyway, my point is that a lot of us collectors sort of take a journey. I started off with Bandai, and then I graduated to Garage Kits, and then I sort of was doing the Vinyl Paradise from Marmot a little bit. I never really latched onto them that much. And then the turning point for me was actually buying a piece from Brian Flynn, who was an owner of Super 7 stores. And we both lived in San Francisco, and he said, "You want to just come pick it up?" And I came to his house and I saw his vintage collection and his, not only vintage, his Marmot and his soft vinyl collection, and I was hooked ever since then. So I can probably say that Brian Flynn is responsible for my soft vinyl addiction. If I can give it to one, if I can credit one person for that. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then real quick, then my journey sort of is now rounding out with, I'm really starting to appreciate vintage pieces that have a story and that do have history. And having been lucky enough to go to Japan several times, I've picked up the majority of my very small collection of vintage pieces by hand from Japan in a shop, which means so much more to me than buying it, you know, from eBay or something like that. Although I could buy it from Showcase Daikaiju, that would be another place to buy it. Which I would feel really good about that.
Or through Mike Johnson too. I mean,
of course,
if he's selling.
Yeah, but I just think that every collector, at some point, who is going to stick with the game, has been in it for the long haul, like I have, and John and Kyle and some of these other guys. It's definitely, at some point, they're going to start to appreciate and to gravitate towards vintage pieces. I know that's true for me, and it may be true for you in the future, because it's not all about, you know, like Mike said, the brand new shiny lottery figure that, you know, 4 people can get, and then in the aftermarket it's, you know, $800. You know, that to me is starting to really turn me off. Well, I can just go buy a cool vintage piece or pick one up myself. So anyway, just wanted to put that in there.
If I can just add on to that, I agree. Nobody wants to collect in a vacuum. It's lonely thinking that you're the only person that might be attracted to this figure or that, or toy, poster, whatever it might be. So it feels good to know that other people like and enjoy the same things that you do.
Absolutely.
And like like Dave said, when you go to see someone else's collection and you go, wow, not only does he get it, it's like, this is something that I can chase with him. I can aspire to have some of these same things. It just really fills you up, makes you feel good. On the East Coast, a lot of the guys that collect vintage, for this generation, we can trace back to Scott Horton's collection. He's not active now, but he was the original person that said in the 90s, I'm going to put together the best vintage collection there is. And he was a dealer, so he made all the shows. People saw him. He was very friendly and personable. Everybody that got to see his collection was like, wow, that's what I want to do. I want to collect vintage and be like Scott. And so he was a big inspiration to a lot of people that are collecting today. And while he's not there doing it, we got Mike Johnson. So everybody wants to be like Mike. I'm a Mike Johnson guy.
Yeah, we should have had our I'm a Mike Johnson guy shirt on. You know, from I think that was G Fest of 2014. That was when the people were wearing their shirts. Anyway, I can't leave Mike out. I was fortunate enough to see Mike's collection when he lived in actually El Cerrito, and again, blew me away. Totally gave me inspiration to get some pieces in my collection. And, he's really helped me and a lot of people along the way with advice and with being able to acquire these toys. So thanks for that, Mike. You're definitely a pioneer, and I can't wait for Club Tokyo to get back on the air, because that was, we all went to that. We all referred to that and referred people to it. So Godspeed, and I can't wait to see that back on the air.
It's all you now. This is your chance to talk about Club Tokyo again, Mike.
Oh, this is a marketing ploy right now. So the question, going back to the question you were originally asking, or talking about Club
whatever
Tokyo?
You like.
I don't know. Yeah, no, but there's something about the new toy, especially with M1, where he actually tries to design and sculpt toys, the vintage style that Bullmark didn't produce, as well as rediscovering molds that Bullmark didn't make, and then trying to produce those under either Be Clever Bullmark brand names. But I don't exclude a lot of the new toys. It's just the last 3 years has just gotten really bad for new toy collecting. And
it's been insane. It's insane the amount of money people are dropping on Marmot Desugojis, etc.
Well,
that's just a joke, though. Marmot Desugojis are just a bad joke at this point. I mean, he's just cranking out 10, making $50 grand in a weekend off of them. So that's a lot of things. But yeah, all the companies are doing that now. I just don't understand it. 'Cause to me, in the end, it just burns out your fellow collectors that are collecting your company's toys. I mean, if you're going to make 10 new color variations within a 2-month frame, no collector can keep up with that in their right minds. And why do you even want to bother? Because at that point, you're burned out on that toy anyways.
Yeah, I think that definitely, that I would completely agree with you in terms of if you're trying to buy every single thing of, this figure or that figure. But I, just in talking to Kaminaga-san recently, I was really surprised that, I guess I shouldn't have been so surprised, but I was surprised to find out that they are catering specifically to that collector market, and that Maru-san is not doing mass market stuff. It's just for the collectors these days.
Yeah, and Mike, your point about M1 doing, the pieces that were never actually produced back in the day. When Kyle did his interview with them, well, actually we all did at G-Fest with them, and they actually told us that's how they got started. They wanted to make figures that they always wished were made in the past. So that's kind of an exception, and they always put out a super high quality toy. And plus, they've also done some retro pieces that have already been produced as well. So yeah, I really like their stuff, and it's super popular and a lot more accessible than some of these other ones that we were referring to, earlier.
I'm pretty impressed. I have to say, I'm pretty impressed with the accessibility of actual vintage. And I've said this to you guys, the collectors in the group and so forth. I'm not a vintage collector. I have a total of, I think I counted 5 pieces, and that's if you include the US stuff. So I guess I really only have 1 or 2 vintage pieces from Japan at all. So for me, it's never been a high priority, but I love the fact that you can decide, you know what, I'm going to go for something vintage, and it's not going to cost you a Desugoji arm and a leg.
I don't have any vintage, but going back on what David had said earlier, I do want to get a vintage piece. There's a few that I've had my eye on, but for my very first one, I want to be like David when you go to Japan and you walk into Mandarake and you get to search through all these shelves full of all the things that they're selling. That's how I want to find my first vintage piece.
And Christine, you have a
in
question
Japan.
to that, right? I think you have a question to that toy.
Oh, I think that was is that the one that's like where's the best shopping for vintage?
Yes.
And I think that was mine.
Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me.
It's all good.
I knew
Hey,
there
as far as I'm concerned, they're communal questions, man.
I knew there would be a question that's
I don't want to steal your questions, Kyle.
It's all good. Now, I was just curious from our guests, like Sean and Mike, in that order. So Mike's not first. Where do you find your best vintage shopping in Japan? Because I'm assuming it's not Tokyo. Sean?
Well, I mean, the easiest shopping is in Tokyo, of course. I mean, it's pretty legendary that if you don't start at the Nakano Broadway, you're probably doing something wrong. And that's the easiest and fastest way to start shopping. And Mandarake has added so many locations now all around the outskirts that you have to stop by them. They're still the biggest. I haven't been to Japan in several years now. It's been 5 or 6 years, so I don't know what toy stores might have closed down since last time I was there. Gojira is still there, and Mr. Kizawa was the owner of that store. is a very good friend and a great influence on me when I first started going to Japan, and helping me out and helping me find a lot of vintage things that are very difficult to find even today. So I would definitely recommend there. But yeah, sure. The Kobe Toys is going to be one of the better vintage places, and you definitely have to make a destination trip if you're going to go there. But Mike is probably the best person to answer on the hot spots right now.
Wait. So did you say Kobe Toys? Like in Kobe, the prefecture, or okay? I've never been, so.
Yeah, well, I'll let Mike take it up. He can answer.
All right, where are we talking about, Mike? Help me out.
Well, the one Sean's talking about is in Kobe, and they've actually moved to a very nice retail location. They used to actually be under the subway tracks, where there used to be a bunch of kind of just random flea market type kind of vendors, and you just spend your time hiking between the two subway stations underneath the freeway, just looking for toys and who had the toys. There used to be about 3 shops that are there, but now they're full blown. So they have a really nice shop now with lots of kind of vintage collectibles, all the way from tins to vinyls. But yeah, I mean, actually, vintage shopping in Japan to me is actually more of a depressing topic than a good topic. I don't really know of a lot of great stores to go to anymore. It's more like you need a time machine to go back 10 or 15 years ago before they all got kind of put out of business. But I mean, yeah, Mandarake is definitely the favorite. I would warn you to be careful, check your toys. Like, I've seen plenty of pictures of the Akihabara Mandarake case post their 2-year flag shop opening. If you don't notice, a lot of the toys in there are actually broken. It's probably vintage. You got to be careful, and they won't note it on the toys either. Like, I almost bought a Canagon there until I noticed his finger was clipped off.
Oh wow!
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I think in your show last time you guys mentioned Ichiban Boshi. That's been a shop that's been probably the 3rd or 4th location now. They used to be in Shinjuku in a lot bigger store. But yeah, he's open like 3 hours on every other Saturday. On the 5th month, like that, so you're lucky to find him.
It's so true. It's so true.
Yes, yep.
And you almost got to go to Gojira. I mean, that's historical. And Forest Gangu reopened in a small shop in the middle of nowhere, but obviously they're not in their pinnacle time, they were like the place to go to. And I mean, there's just not a lot of variety to go to. I mean, I think John mentioned someplace in Nagoya that I've always looked for but never could find.
In Osukanon Temple area, there's about almost close to a dozen shops in Nagoya. It's worth the trip if you venture in Osaka. Nagoya has a nice little selection of shops. Mandarake and Jungle are there, but there's a whole host of little shops. You can find some good stuff. You can find some vintage figures, no doubt.
I would recommend, if you're really interested in shopping vintage in Japan, and you have a limited amount of time, I would recommend trying to schedule your trip around a Superfest. That's going to be the best chance to locate a variety of vintage figures. All the dealers come together. They're going to bring their best stuff. You'll have a chance to get some show exclusives, or a show exclusive, probably more likely, because once you stand in line for one, all the rest will be sold out. But you'll at least get a chance to see a bunch of vintage figures, and then you can worry about enjoying your trip more than taking a 3-hour train ride to visit one store that may or may not have something that you're interested in.
Interesting. I didn't think the Superfest would focus on vintage toys all that much. I thought it was all like the newer stuff, but it only makes sense that they'd have some there. But that's a good point, a good suggestion. If
Super Festival is very much like a flea market, essentially. They do have like X Plus shows new stuff, Future shows new stuff, Marusan, Gigabrain. They do show their new product, but a majority of the people that are at Super Festival are, I don't know, hobbyists, I guess I would say, for selling stuff. That was my impression, excuse me, from the only time I've ever been there. Is that your impression too, Mike? That's mostly Super Festival is like hobbyists?
I mean, it's a great split compared to like Wonderfest. You got the one room that have manufactured and they kind of bleed into the second room a little bit. Then you got a bunch of old shops like Omrise is out of business now, but he still sets up at Superfest. Goodyear Yacht usually has a table. The worker from Goodyear Yacht has a table at Superfest. And you've just got a bunch of random people, setting up tables. And it's the best treasure hunting kind of experience too that you can have if that's part of your fun of buying toys. To me, Monterocki is kind of, you go in there, you hope to find something, then it's just a matter of how much money you want to spend. But something like Superfest is actually more of an adventure. So
That's excellent. I never knew that. This is the first time I'm hearing that, so I'm pretty excited to hear that. That's great. I thought it was all, centered around newer stuff. So that's good to know. Everybody knows that now. That's awesome. Thank you.
And Superfest is
no, I take it back.
Deals.
There's nothing but brand new stuff.
I'm sorry,
don't. There's no secret there.
Well, I didn't know.
No, it's totally, in my opinion, like Super Festival is, if you're looking for toys on a broad scale, vinyl figures on a broad scale, Super Festival seems like a great place to do that. If you can take the time to go table by table and look at what they have, because a lot of places have like the bins with the figures still in plastic.
I love that stuff.
Wow,
That's great. What time of year does the Superfest
Treasure hunting
happen?
Okay, so
not this year, obviously, but typically.
Right. 3 times a year, if I'm right. I can't remember. There's definitely one in early. What was that, Mike? Was it 3 or 4?
I think it's 3 or 4. It changes. Sometimes they throw in one in Osaka to try to see if they...
Right. Wow. Yeah.
I
So
think there's
basically,
one in November they're trying to have right now.
oh, okay. Well, that would be kind of cool.
wow
Yeah.
So you got one basically in the early part of the year. So we went in January one year. That was in 2017, and then you'll have one in the spring, and then one sometime in the summer, and maybe one in the fall. But like Mike said, they've actually done a few in Osaka recently.
Nice. Excellent.
So I think we should probably get to some of our questions. David, I think you wanted to ask about the qualities of a vintage figure.
Actually, my question had to do with personalization, or how does personalization or writing affect the value of a vintage piece? I personally have a Popey right here that I picked up for a really reasonable price, and it's in super fantastic condition, but it's got a signature on the bottom. So how do you guys feel about this? Does it seriously devalue the figure? Not that I'm ever going to sell it, or would you choose one that has some writing on it as opposed to one that's in worse condition that has no writing on it? I know that's a lot of questions. Sean, let's start with you. Just jump right in there.
Well, I'm going to give the Lorelei response here. It depends. So if it's an extremely rare figure and the only one you can find is one with writing on it, then I would be tempted to settle for that. I'm going to say settle. But I prefer, when I pick up a vintage piece, and I understand your position that you want that history with it. This was a cherished piece that a kid got and he loved it and played with it, and he's passing that love down to you. I tend to go. I want it how it looked when that kid saw it in the store.
Got it.
So I want what he saw that made his eyes go like this, and oh my gosh, I need to have that. That's how I want my figure to look.
Okay.
So for that reason, I prefer no writing. It's obvious it's going to affect the value. I mean, they can't. If you have one figure that's X and it's in the same condition with writing, then it has to be X minus something for the writing. How much of a deduction is going to be? How much writing is there? How rare is the figure? What are the odds that I can get a different one? So I can't say it's always 20% or 30% or something like that, but there is going to be certainly a reduction for writing on it.
Excellent. How about you, Mike?
Almost exactly the same as Sean. I've settled for pieces with writing, but I know at some point in my life I'm going to want to upgrade them or replace them. To me, and the reality is most of the time it sits on a shelf, so you don't even see the writing. And the sad thing is I've seen a lot of great pieces with great paint shape, but have writing, and I've not bought them because of the writing.
Interesting.
So, I mean, it's kind of, it's a weird, if the writing's on the foot, it's one thing, but if the writing's like on the back of the toy, which I've seen,
that's
definitely a deal for me.
That could be a little bit different.
And also, I don't know the legal reasons if the kid comes back looking for his toy 30 years later.
That's pretty interesting.
Sorry, bro, that's my toy. Yes, my name is on it. Yeah.
Now, this is going to segue into a question that one of our viewers had for you guys. How do you suggest collectors carefully remove magic marker stains from a figure or a toy? If there is a way to do it safely that you recommend?
Paint over it.
Okay.
I mean, Sharpie and magic marker, Sharpie. Fading over time is going to be about the best you can do. There's not really a soap combination that's going to take Sharpie out. So if that's what it is, you're kind of stuck. If it's a ballpoint pen or a crayon or something that you can work with, but Sharpies are good for life, pretty much.
Oh, man. And part two to that question, Tom Hadlachuk asked if it's safe or recommended to use boiling water to sort of reshape limbs that may have been warped over time.
Absolutely.
It's okay to do that?
Yeah. I was telling Kyle the other day that...
I wanted you to tell the story, yes.
Nobody believes me when I tell them this, but... everybody says warm water, light, a little toothbrush, and go lightly on your figure, blah blah blah. Here's the absolute best thing: if for cleaning, non-tagged figures. This is for just the vinyl only. Put them in your dishwasher. Don't use soap, and just put it on a light rinse.
Wow.
Water is the ultimate cleaner of everything. You can absolutely safely clean. Let's think about this. You're already going, well, I'm using water and a light brush. That's all the dishwasher is water. Okay. It's hot water. It'll get the dust off. It'll make it look a lot better.
Excellent.
Wow.
Thank you. That's good to know.
But wait, what if you don't have a dishwasher?
Well, then you're stuck with the boiling water and a toothbrush.
I just wanted to acknowledge that Roger says that to remove magic marker, you just draw a pentagram and magic marker on the floor, dance around with Led Zeppelin, and a demon will appear, mate with the demon. And I guess the follow-up to that is that the demon will remove their magic marker for you.
Wow, he is really doing the secrets that we've been trying to hide.
Oh, so sorry. This show will expose all those secrets.
So I picked this guy up for my 50th birthday in Osaka, the Popey Jumbosaurus, and I was so excited to get it for a decent price, and I hand carried it home on the plane. I didn't realize until a couple of months later, actually, that it did have some black marker kind of scribbled across the front of it, and it kind of bummed me out. And what I did was I sort of just figured out what to do. I took some Goo Gone, which is that citrusy stuff, and I diluted it with water, and I took a Q-tip and let it soak, kept doing it over and over again over a couple of days. And then I took a toothpick and broke it in half so it's the softer part in the center. and I kind of scraped it, and every single bit of it came off without removing any
Wow.
That's fantastic.
paint. But this is not a vinyl toy. This is a hard plastic toy.
Mhm.
So this might be a little different scenario than your typical Marathon or Bullmark. So I just wanted to put that out there that it's totally, you cannot tell, and I'm so happy that I was able to get that off, because
That's great. And Gugan works wonders for old price tags, price stickers, and things like that on boxes. It's a miracle product.
Perfect.
Good to know.
All right. So actually, John, you had some questions. It's time to talk to you, sir. So, you've been quiet there in the corner
I
for
know,
quite a bit.
right.
Let's unleash one of these questions on the unsuspecting guests we have here, please.
All right. Well, it's an honor to be able to be with you both today, and it's been also thank you for the times you've helped me get pieces in my collection. One of the questions I think you already answered, but it was about I know not to keep my collectibles in the sun and keep them cool, and keep the humidity down, etc. But do you ever store your figures away for a period of time to just, or do you always keep your collection, your vinyls or whatnot, on display? And then how do you mentioned the cleaning, put them in the dishwasher, but are there other things you do? Especially with the older pieces, like, from the 60s, 70s, etc.
I'll go first on this. I was actually looking for a photo to go with this example before we started tonight, and thankfully, I couldn't find one because it would make me cry. The only time that I put stuff in storage was about six years ago, when we were getting ready to buy a new house and running out of room and trying to get the old house ready to go, kind of thing. We rented a storage unit, and I put a lot of stuff in storage for a few months there, and naturally, as happens, there was a fire. And I lost a tremendous amount of material, and it made me very sad.
I did not know that. So sorry.
That's awesome.
The one side that if you're going to put stuff in storage, and even for home, make sure you have proper insurance. Homeowners insurance will cover things off-site, but usually there's a cap compared to what you have at your actual residence. So always check with that. But if you're going to keep things in storage away from your house, and a lot of places are going to ask you to list out, specific items of extraordinary valuable. But I would just check with your insurance carrier. If you start to feel that you've got enough collectibles worth that you need to insure them, then you probably do, and it's better safe than sorry. So
I think I have some homework to do.
Me too. Yeah, I definitely have some homework to do.
Yeah.
I have a tip for that.
Okay.
Actually, so what I started doing is cataloging my collection. So every time I buy something, or I would go through my old records, and I started a spreadsheet of the name of it. If you can take pictures of what you have, that also helps with like the insurance aspect of it. The price, when you bought it. I found cataloging really helps you, and it also helps you realize how much you've actually spent on these. Because when I look at these, I don't think, well, I know I've spent a lot, but I didn't realize how much I actually spent until you put it and you actually write it down and total it. And like Sean says, definitely I would recommend insurance on your collection.
Oh man! And you have to get them notarized by Sean or Mike. but I'm sure there'll be a slight
Vintage check.
There'll be a slight fee.
There'll be a slight fee. All right. So, yeah, go for it.
I was just going to ask, how do you, and this might be a question you might want to answer later, but how do you do your research for maybe a vintage item you're looking for?
If I'm going to answer, define research. Research as in like
maybe, I don't know, from shops you want to go to, or people you want to contact, or websites, or and even looking up, reproductions. What are some things that you always a checklist of items or steps you take to there's books we have that Sean you've written in that help us, but are there things that you do that help you along the way.
Yeah, I'm
You don't have
lazy
to give away
now.
your
I
secrets.
don't research anymore. No, it's it's the same thing. You have to talk to people that you trust, and I appreciate when people come to me all the time and ask about, is this an original figure? Do you think this has been fixed? Blah blah blah. And I'll give them my best opinion. Of course, it's very difficult over the internet. Some things you can tell right away. Oh, that's just way too shiny. That can't possibly be, or it's the wrong height. It's the wrong size. So I know that's not an original figure. But there's nothing that replaces being able to hold it in your hands, feel it, smell it. How thick is the vinyl? How is the paint on it? Is there multiple layers? I would recommend getting a black light sometimes that can help you reveal if things have been painted over. There's a lot, especially today's values on the high-end figures. There's every incentive to fix small defects. And like Mike said, you can go into Mandrake. They don't tell you. It's, buyer beware. So you're expected to know what you're looking for. And if it's your first time seeing a figure, you might not realize that, oh, that little spike on the back of Anguillus has been broken. And you don't know. So it's definitely it's great having someone that you can bounce things off of. And sure, I mean, I bounce things off other people. I'll ask Mike, Mike and I talk about vintage figures and what do you think about this? Does that look painted to you? Et cetera, et cetera. And of course, there's people in Japan that I trust that I'll seek out their opinions on too. So that's exactly what it is just finding other people that you feel comfortable talking with and that are happy to share that knowledge with you.
Excellent, thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and ask you guys a question from the chat. This is from Roger, who's watching live on YouTube. He would like to know your perspectives individually, both Sean and Mike, on the vintage prices in the U.S. over the years being affected by wider access to stores like Mandarake options, like Yahoo Japan auctions. So, Mike, how about you, man? What do you think about the prices we're seeing today in the U.S. for vintage vinyl stuff being affected by more accessibility in Japan?
I think it's definitely helped collectors be able to attain a lot more because they're not dependent on other people going over, buying, coming back, and selling for whatever 2x, 3x the price they paid. Mandarake actually works in two ways. I think Mandarake's prices are a lot higher. If you don't know, Mandarake is actually bidding against you on a lot of Japan auctions, so they can resell the items either in their stores or on their premier auction sites. I think, Japan it's just like what eBay did to America. As soon as eBay started taking off, we saw a lot less toy shows, a lot less collectible shops started having harder times with business and closing. And that's kind of what Yahoo Japan has also done. I mean, obviously the mom and pop shops, people don't come in to sell them their toys. So they don't have inventory, boom, they're gone. But for us, it's allowed us to not have to go to Japan, not to be relying on other people. And also for me, it's opened up a whole new world of items I didn't even know were around or available by shopping on Yahoo, especially Yahoo Japan. I mean, you can just find a plethora of stuff that I never even saw in books or saw in shops in America and stuff like that. So I think for us, it's great. I think it's been a big plus, I think, for collectors, especially in the States.
And how about you, Sean?
I agree. When I made my first trip to Japan, it was 1995. I went when Godzilla vs. Destroyer was in the theaters, and of course hit. So some of the stores that I went to then are still around today, and of course Mandrake was one of them. But the prices that I paid for figures then, for what you would consider a starter Bullmark now, like a Ghidra, which is on the lower price scale, still a great looking figure. I was paying back then $250 to $300 sometimes for a Ghidra figure, which now I retail usually about $125 to $175. So the prices have dropped because of that competition.
Wow.
When you're at Japan and you've got a collection and you're going to sell it, you don't have to take it to a store anymore, and they don't have to hold you hostage on the prices. You can sell it on Yahoo Japan yourself and cut out the middleman. And the prices they took a huge drop at the start, and I think they're starting to come back up. And of course, the rarest, what we call the best of the best, has remained high priced the entire time. So for that regard, I mean, the internet has been great. I'm obviously a poster guy. The last couple of trips that I made to Japan, I was not able to find a single poster for my collection. And that's not for a lack of trying. I hit all the usual spots, but nobody had anything I needed. thankfully, I have access to Yahoo Japan and Mandrake and other stores and sources online. There are Japanese stores that don't sell on Yahoo Japan that are just strictly Japanese stores. So I seek them out, and when they put their inventory on now, I get the same chance of it as everybody else does. So I'm able to add to my collection much more regularly than when I actually went to Japan more often. So the internet has been a huge blessing as far as that's concerned. And prices, and sometimes, yes, you'll see the people that only know to go buy at Mandrake, and they're already paying maybe a top retail on some pieces. Just like anywhere, Mandrake is going to have pieces that are high, pieces that are low, just like every store is going to. So if somebody's just going in there and buying and bringing it back to the U.S. and trying to flip it, they're going to have a pretty high price on it. But thankfully, we've had enough stuff come to America over the years that a lot of our prices are very similar to the prices that you see in Japan. So we've got stuff that's recirculated here that has been brought over and has been sold 5, 6, 7 times to different collectors and dealers, and it's already been absorbed into U.S. pricing. So I think U.S. dealers are able to compete a little bit better than they were 20 years ago.
Very cool. I mean, I think as a collector who enjoys being connected to these kinds of things, I think all that is good in the long run, because in the long run, it gets the pieces that are older, that are vintage, in the hands of the people that actually want them, as opposed to, like, what I do is I just collect those reissue figures, All right, I had a question for you guys in terms of when you're out there looking for specifically vinyl from the olden days, your vintage vinyl stuff. What are your qualities that you look for in a vintage vinyl piece? Sean, is there anything specifically that you're like we already sort of talked about personalization versus no personalization, but what about some of the other stuff, the quality of the paint, the quality of the vinyl? Someone mentioned the quality, like the thickness of the vinyl. Sean, was that you?
Sure. A lot of the newer reissues tend to be a better quality vinyl than what was used originally, so they're going to be a little bit harder vinyl than the vintage pieces, and that's one way to tell. And the type of paint that's used nowadays is different than what was used in the 60s and 70s. For me, like I said earlier, I try to find a piece that's as close to the condition that it was sold in the store. So the closer it is to that, then the more interested I am in it.
Mike, same. I guess you have the same response essentially, right?
No, my response is better, of course.
Excellent.
My hunting is a lot more simple. At this point, it's kind of sad. It's just mostly if I can find something that I don't have, and the fact that it's in a usable condition. Obviously, if it's broken or something like that, I'll part with it. But at some point, there's only a certain few pieces that you need to fill holes in your collection. And then you get more desperate and you do stupid stuff or spend stupid amounts of money on something that probably wasn't even worth that much, but just to fill that hole of something you've been looking for 15, 20 years and maybe you've only seen once or twice. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard, I think, to tell between a old vinyl and a new vinyl. If someone really wants to fool you or repaint it, I think you'd have a hard press. I mean, my eyes aren't that good. I'm just not that skilled. Mm-hmm. I mean, outside of somebody like Yuji, I've seen him have questions too when he's looked at stuff. And I mean, yeah, it's just really tough not being part of it. If you live over there, I think you're submersed a lot more into the history, and maybe growing up with it a kid, you'll have a better aptitude for being able to sort out between new and older vinyls. But anyways,
so I want to kick this question over to, this is David's question for you guys, about an area in the non-continental United States, David.
Yes. What is the deal with the infamous Hawaiian color spray figures? And tell us how you feel about those. And do you own any yourselves? Let's start with you, Mike.
Oh, well, that's a big debate, because obviously you're going to get people mad at you for calling them Hawaiian variations. But we won't go into that political stuff. Well, yeah, no, actually, yeah, I have a ton of them. Not all toys that were sold in Hawaii were Hawaii variations. They sold normal Japanese versions over there as well. A lot of times you'll see a pairing of two. You'll see like a Hawaii spray paint, and then you'll see like a beige base vinyl version. So you actually have two based. But even like for Ella King, you have two base paint variations that are Hawaii. But you'll get into a lot of arguments too of what is Hawaii and what is not Hawaii. It's not an established thing. It wasn't like this is Hawaii, it's only being sold in Hawaii. There's no reason that those weren't also sold in Japan at the same time as well. So you kind of create a mixture. Because I find a lot more Hawaii, like the Megalon that people call Hawaii. I've found a lot more of those over in Japan than I've ever found in the States. And there's certain Hawaii variations I've found a lot more over in Hawaii, people from Hawaii that have collections from when they were a kid. And that's usually actually one of the best things to find is you find someone that found their toys from 30 years ago. And they have no idea what they had. Then you start looking at all the paint sprays, and then you can kind of judge and go, yeah, these probably are Hawaii, because he doesn't even know that they're worth $2,000. He thinks they're worth $50 kind of thing.
Wow.
So I'm not doing anything to trick you. And that's one of the best ways to kind of track. But I don't know, I've heard lots of stories about why and how they did Hawaii variations. I've never gotten to the bottom of what's right and what's wrong, because there's no conclusive, I think, answer. Like one of the big mysteries, was there a Hawaii Mechagodzilla? That's one thing I've asked Yuji about. I've never gotten a straight answer. I know Kajimoto created a magazine article, and he had like 5 different versions of Mechagodzilla, and I think one was claimed to be Hawaii, but you can't tell. An old collector that we used to talk to, sadly has passed away recently, was a big help in finding some of these things. But even he was unsure, and he actually had a toy shop in Hawaii around that period of time too, and was a big collector of vinyls. So yeah, to me, it's kind of still a mystery. Things still pop up, whether they're Hawaii or not, people question. I don't think that because something's Hawaii that it makes it necessarily cooler than another vinyl. There seems to be some kind of, people grade their collections on whether they have Hawaii or not Hawaii vinyls. To me, they're just different variants and different color variations, and they're all cool.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I just been hearing about the Hawaiian spray vinyls all these years, and I never really knew what the deal was, and I just assumed that they were made specifically for Hawaiian shops to be sold in Hawaii, but I guess that's not true necessarily. And if you can, do you actually happen to have a Hawaii spray figure that you can show us?
You want a picture of one?
If you have a picture or one in your collection, either way, that would be cool.
The collection's in another part of the house.
Okay.
But I think Matt Old actually translated an interview with the Bullmark guy. I thought if you look back on Toy Box DX, you can probably find it. He had some good explanations of some interesting things, how he visited Hawaii and he liked the bright colors of the island, so he thought the toys would be more marketable in that regards. So that's something I've heard people rip that article apart, so I don't really. So how do I share my, I gotta find the screen share. So this is probably the biggest classic for Toho collectors. Application window. Cut. Okay. That in theory is probably one of the most iconic Toho collectible Hawaii figures.
Yeah, Hedorah, yeah, cool. Nice.
So why are the Hawaiian figures so much more expensive? Just because of the color variants, or because I've noticed, like you had said, the Megalon was like $2,000. Why? Was there like a limited release of those, or?
I mean, it has to do with the rarity, and also some of it just. I mean, it's not true. I mean, there's Hawaii variants that are worth less than the Japanese versions of the same toy. Like Megas, Rarest, Metron, those ones aren't really necessarily super valuable. Yeah, it just has to do with the rarity. I think for a long time they were more heavily sought because the Japanese collectors didn't have direct access to them, so that helped push up the value.
Got it. Push up the value of it. I've been hearing about the Gorosaurus Hawaii version. That's a popular one, or one that people are really after. Yeah, I think that was one that was a sought after Hawaiian piece. So,
see, that's a beige one here. I want to give you a picture of that one real quick.
Yeah, sure.
So the question is the stripe belly want variation to that Hawaii or non-Hawaii?
Okay.
Because that would fit the mixture of having a more vibrant paint version. And I've seen more of them available directly from the United States. Oh, you're showing my brand.
Oh, here, I'll stop that until you're ready.
I'll find something at the same time. It's not working.
No, it's an interesting topic because, you know, you hear all these things that collectors talk. Oh, yeah. Okay.
So you can see this is the kind of the concept that they had a beige vinyl base. In my opinion on this is this near the end of the run, because a lot of the Hawaiis are 74, I think, or sometime. Right. Is that it's cheaper to do runs in the same kind of vinyl color than they just painted them up to look like the other toys.
Ah, interesting. I was like
circulation. It's kind of fun. You can kind of make up a little story about them if you want, really.
Yeah.
I'm sure Sean will have a more conclusive answer than me.
Yeah, Sean, you want to give your take on this too, please?
I'm not sure there's super conclusive answers. Probably the only real thing that I'm going to continue to call them Hawaii vinyls myself, but probably the proper term for them is export vinyls. They were painted specifically for sale outside of Japan.
Got it.
Now, does that mean that if they're running short in the warehouse in Tokyo and they needed to fill an order for some retailer in Tokyo that they might have gotten one? Possibly, but the intent was for them to be sold outside of Japan.
Got it.
So the market for figures outside of Japan was very limited compared to the numbers that they sold in Japan. So therefore, the figures had a more limited distribution to start with. And of course, kids that bought them in the 70s didn't pick them up and go, wow, this is a Hawaii variation. This is totally different than the one that I saw in Japan last month. They had no idea. So they got discarded a lot easier, and they weren't as collected, and they weren't identified as being something different and significant. Mike might be onto something about the cream colored Goro being an export version also. When I purchased a large collection of vintage figures from Alex Wald, who was specifically in the 70s flying to San Francisco to buy figures to bring back to the Chicago group of collectors, he had a cream belly Gorosaurus, and certainly that was sourced, I believe, from here in America. So it could very well be. But yes, the spray colors and variations that they used for these export figures tended to be a little bit brighter, a little bit more metallic paints than what they used back home. And it's very unusual for a lot of these, especially like the Hedorah or the flesh-colored Anguillus, to actually be originally sourced from somewhere in Japan. It would be very unusual for someone to claim, oh yeah, I bought this at a store in Japan. This doesn't happen. Almost all of them are sourced from Hawaii or somewhere on the West Coast.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys. That cleared up a lot of it for me anyway. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm gonna dip into the chat here. Demon by Design's asking a question for our guests or presenters, maybe all of us, mostly the guests though. How are the vintage USA figures, the American stuff, looked on by the Japanese collectors? Is there a desire by Japanese collectors to own American Godzilla stuff?
Who's going first?
I guess I'll go with Mike first. Mike, do you have collector friends in Japan, right?
Yeah, I was going to suggest Sean. Yeah, I mean, I think the old vintage original stuff, I think collectors in Japan want. But most of the collectors I've known in Japan are mostly Bullmark Marazan kind of kooks, and that's what they collect. So yeah, I don't have any really much insight into that one. I'm sure Yuji collects everything that he can get his hands on, pretty much. So he has a great collection of original U.S. Godzilla stuff.
Yeah, Yuji basically collects anything, anything you can think of. Yuji Nishimura has a collection of that, I think.
And the best collection of it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, hands down. Wow. Oh my God.
Yeah. So it's unfair to compare him with us mortal collectors. But again, we're getting to, there's not a lot of vintage American stuff. So do Japanese collectors, do they want an Aurora Godzilla? Yes or no? If they collect model kits, then yeah, they're going to want an Aurora Godzilla. If they only collect soft vinyl figures, then they probably don't want an Aurora Godzilla. Do they want the Godzilla gang variation figure? Some of them do. They've got a better Shogun than we do, so they probably don't care about that. But what they do care about is the Rodan. They absolutely want the Mattel Rodan.
Wow.
So that is a high demand figure in Japan and in America.
Wow.
It's to be determined how the Trendmasters figures are going to hold up. A lot of what we consider the rare Trendmasters figures were first source out of some Japanese sources because they came for sale at the end, in Taiwan, Hong Kong, areas like that, and were brought over for sale in Japan, and some of them made their ways back here. Talking about like the 10-inch Violante from Doom Island and things like that. I think some of those are going to hold up very well as far as Japanese collectibles go too, because rarity is a rarity, and if you're collecting, you're going to want to add that at some point in time, no matter where it's from.
Cool. Very cool. Right on. John, did you have a
question
Oh,
regarding?
let's definitely let Christine go.
Sorry. Well, since Sean had mentioned rarity, what do you guys consider to be some of the most rarest vintage vinyl pieces out there? I'll start with Mike.
Me, probably the Garamond with a movable tail, or the Gomez with a movable tail are probably two of the rarest.
Wait, what Godzilla movie was he in?
Hey, this is restricted to Godzilla only.
Are those Bullmarks or Marisons?
Those would be Marathon first editions. As far as Godzilla, I mean, obviously, like the lime green Godzilla, I've only ever seen one of those in a private collection before. And that's like one of the most beautiful Godzilla sculpts and paints I've ever seen. The lime green, I think it's a bluish metallic spray on it. But like I said, I mean, yeah, I don't.
What was that, Marathon?
I thought it was Marazon, or it was Marazon because it was done along with the Marazon Minya run. It's the same kind of green as the Marazon Minya, if I believe I'm correct. I mean, obviously everybody talks about the J-tail, but I don't understand. And that's a confusing piece to me because I don't understand why some have stamps on the feet and some don't have stamps. I've never been able to figure out an answer to that one.
Can we real quick explain what the J-tail means to people who aren't into vintage? They might not know what that means, the J-tail version. Mm-hmm. Looks like a J instead of an L, right?
I can find a picture. It's just it's the
instead of an L, right?
90 degrees to the ground, basically. And I think it's the same as the Marazon Play model has the same J-tail, right? I mean, I don't really include
like this
model kits, but
there you go.
Right.
That's him.
Mike did an article in Super 7 about the J-tail right there. You can see one.
That's not an original, though.
Oh, that's not an original?
Oh, no. I mean, that was like me and Brian, and neither one of us. Brian might have a J-tail because he's money. But yeah, no, that was probably, I think that's probably either an M1 reissue or a Marazon reissue in the magazine would be my guess. But obviously the myth is that the molds all broke and they were hard to find and blah, blah, blah. But so actually, yeah, I mean, yeah, in the Godzilla realm, it's hard to say which the rarest. It's probably just some wacky paint variant. I mean, the red Marazon Minya obviously seems to be pretty rare, but with those I've seen 2 or 3. The blue vinyl giant Godzilla is very rare, but I've seen 2 or 3 of those. Mm-hmm. So I guess the lime green, I've only seen 1, but that's just my limited experience in collecting. I mean, I'm sure other people have other opinions of what they've seen. Yeah, I mean, the last 4 years I've been collecting more of the Ultra Realm stuff, and a lot of that stuff seems to be a lot more harder to find than the Toho stuff. I think the production span was a lot shorter on some of the Ultra vinyls as compared with Godzilla. It would stretch more years, obviously, with the Ultraman would be mostly focused around that show, and obviously it continued a little bit after on with the more popular monsters. Mm-hmm. Like Sasha Healers in the Steelix Asian are super hard to find. But I'm just naming the ones I need, basically, is what I'm naming. So, Sean.
I don't care how collectible or rare or expensive that Bullmark Minya is. I don't want that ugly thing in my house. Sorry about it.
The Bullmark one's not the rare one. It's the Marathon.
It has to be aesthetically pleasing to some degree to be in my collection, and that thing just does not cut it. It is ugly as the day is long. So anyway, just my opinion.
It doesn't even look like me.
But that's why it needs love.
What's that?
But that's why it needs love.
It needs love, but it can get love elsewhere.
Please, won't you give this Minya a home for only 25 cents a day over there?
Save the Minya.
No.
I'm gonna just toss this out to the guys watching live. First up, thank you to everybody watching live. We still got we got 48 people watching right now. We're about an hour and 13 minutes into this whole shebang. I don't know how long we're gonna be. Not gonna be a 3-hour episode, I promise. But if you guys have any questions for our guys here, Sean or Mike, about vintage stuff, about vinyl just in general, or even not vinyl figures, like we sort of called it vintage kaiju vinyl as the title of the episode. But if you have questions about some stuff that maybe Sean or Mike might be able to answer, go ahead and pop that into the chat and I'll grab it throughout the next round of questions. John, I think it would be a great time for you to ask another one of your questions from your list at this point.
So I'm going to modify the question I had written and I thought about. But is there an item that for you personally that it didn't matter how much it was going to be, you were going to get it? And was there something you purchased that you regretted getting?
Oh, interesting.
I'd say you ask Sean first.
I mean, I tried. Is there something I purchased that I regret? I'm going to say no, because you'll forget about the money eventually, but you'll remember that you had the piece and you'll enjoy it. So has it come to the point where there are certain pieces that if they finally pop up for sale, that I'm prepared to go to the mattresses for them and pay double or triple what I consider to be retail? Unfortunately, yes. And it has happened. And you just, sometimes you just have to suck up and pay it and go, would I rather have this now and enjoy it for the next 10 years until I can find another one? And hopefully that 1 in 10 years will be cheaper, or not. And that's happened more in posters than in vinyl. But I purchased a Matango card last year to finish off my set on that.
Awesome.
It was the first time for sale I'd seen it in 20 years. And I decided, am I going to wait another 20 years to find it? Or am I just going to go ahead and, bite the bullet and pay what it's going to cost to get it? And I paid what it cost to get it. So it hurt at the time, but I've already forgotten how much it is. I'm going to tell myself, and I enjoy it every day. So that's totally worth it to me.
Fantastic.
That's what it's all about. You enjoy it every day. You just answered the question right there. That's
right.
Mike, did you have an answer for that too?
Perfect.
Pretty much along the same lines as Sean has been saying. Yeah, especially you get to this thing where there's a hole in your collection of something you've been looking for. Maybe you saw a long time ago when you first started collecting, but you just weren't at a place where you could get it, or you had other things ahead of it and it was just too expensive. And now when they pop up, you have to get it. But obviously there's things that have been happening the last 8 months. I've kind of put some of that into a different perspective, at least for me, as far as going crazy and bidding twice retail or bidding a crazy amount on a toy with all that's kind of been changing on in the world without getting into too much stuff. But I've always found out whenever there's something I really want and I go to the mat for it, I wake up in the morning, I do the bidding, battle it out for 2 hours with somebody, and I read it says on Yahoo. There's always the one guy that wants it one more bid than me. And so I've kind of got to the point now where it's like, I'd rather sleep 2 hours and just let him have the toy.
Wow.
But
I hate bidding wars on Yahoo Japan because of that auto extension.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But if you really want it, you really want it, right? I guess that's how it goes.
I wish it wasn't 10 minutes, because then the guy always wastes the last 9 minutes and 55 seconds to bid. So you get a 2-minute extension. That way it can go a little bit quicker. But,
right, so let's see, what do we have here? Looking in the chat right now, Kaiju Sommelier is asking, he says he heard that slush casting was brought over to Japan in the 50s via Mattel to make Barbies in occupied Japan because it was cheaper to do in Japan. Do you guys know if that's true?
I have not heard that, but I would not be surprised if that's true at all. Of course, now Barbie started in 59, so that would be not just the 50s, but the tail end of the 50s into the 60s. And I would think, certainly at that time, the yen was probably still 250, maybe even 300 to 1. Not the 100 to 1 that we get now, a little bit more in par. So it had to be cheaper to make them in Japan than here.
All right, what else do we have here? Actually, David, do you have any more questions from your list?
Yeah, I do. Actually, it's not on the list, but this is a question that I have. So if you guys were to recommend 3 pieces for the aspiring vintage collector, what would they be?
All right, I'm going to go first.
Sure.
Because I have preloaded my answer for this with Kyle in anticipation that someone might ask such a question. So if Kyle wants to load up the slides, I'll just explain my answer as he shows the picture.
All right.
So there it is. This for David and I. This is the toy we saw in Smog Monster. This is really the only Japanese toy that I have an attachment to from my childhood, because this is the toy that I saw Kenny playing with on the slide in Smog Monster.
John is stoked right now.
Yeah, it's and it's surprisingly affordable. It's if you get one in really, really beat up shape, you might get lucky and find it for $250, $300. A nice one of that particular color variation is not going to run more than $600 or $700. There's a couple of very rare color variations that can climb more than that. But again, this is about as affordable as an X Plus figure, so it should be on the radar for a lot of collectors.
It's on mine. Absolutely.
I would love to know if you were going to search for this particular figure, and I'm obviously talking about the original vintage piece. Is there a search term that you look for when you're looking for this particular one? Is it a color variant, or like literally do you have to type in like original?
That is not a color variant. That's the standard one. Probably the easiest place would be to look on Showcase Daikaiju. Sometimes they get them for sale, as one of our moderators can tell you.
Man, where's that ka-ching sound effects?
The official term for that is the giant Bullmark Godzilla. It's just called
thank you.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. I'm going to probably unload my repro and save my pennies and get a vintage piece for that. That's awesome. Excellent.
All right, so that's one. Number two, this is going to be a tough one. This is going to depend on if you're from America or if you're from Japan. But this is actually, both of the ones in this picture are made by Bandai. This is the Shogun Warrior Godzilla, and then the Popey Jumbosaurus Godzilla, which is for the 70s collectors. This would be they're a grail. Much taller than average, as Dave is showing you there. The jumbo stands about 14 inches tall, maybe.
Wow.
Yeah, he's pretty big. He's actually pretty damn big.
Yeah, the Shogun's actually taller than that. He's about 19 inches tall. And the fist firing Godzilla is just a classic legendary piece. Everybody's heard about it, whether you've had it or not.
Okay, got one down.
Merry Christmas gift.
All right, let's get the third.
All right, last but not least, of course, is your standard Bullmark or Marathon Godzilla. I mean, this is the first vinyl. So what could be more classic and iconic than that? The original toys, whether you prefer the Marathon one or the Bullmark, they're again both surprisingly affordable. The standard Bullmark is going to run you $200 to $300 most likely. Sometimes you get it for a little less, sometimes you get it for a little more. The Marathon's just going to be a little bit more than that. Again, for a regular one, I'm not talking any different color paint variations or Hawaii version or something along those lines. If you get more comfortable with it, you can start to expand onto that. But again, your basic Bullmark Godzilla is a surprisingly affordable toy.
Outstanding. 2 out of the 3.
Yeah.
Yes. I am looking for now.
Now, what's the difference?
Okay, real quick. I'm looking for a Bullmark Rodan to complete my big 3 because I've got Godzilla, King Ghidorah, now I need a Rodan. So I'll have to keep checking.
Not Bullmark though.
Marasan or Bullmark, either one.
Marasan didn't make a Rodan, so
so Bullmark.
That would be Bullmark.
Bullmark Rodan, and I'll keep checking Showcase Daikaiju, and if you get one, you can just let me know, and I'll be on it.
I've been lazy. I've got one that I haven't put up on the site yet, so now I might have to do it just for you.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Oh, you didn't hear that, people in the chat.
Exactly.
Ignore that. So, I'm sorry, Christine. Go ahead. What was your question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a little bit of a lag. So in the last picture that you just showed from Sean, now what's the difference between the Maru-san and the Bullmark Godzilla that you showed there? Because to me, they looked very similar.
They are exactly the same. So the question is always going to be what's the difference between Marathon and Bullmark in general? And the idea is to remember that Bullmark was basically formed from Marathon. They are essentially the same company. They went out of business. The family reformed it. I believe it was the nephew, and started within 4 or 5 months of Marathon going out. They got all the molds that Marathon used. So the Bullmark Godzilla is exactly the same mold as the Marathon Godzilla. So it's exactly the same figure. The only difference is going to be on the foot. The old Marathon stamp was tooled out and replaced with a Bullmark stamp. So you're going to have to flip them over and look at the foot to be able to tell which is which. So
would that make the Maru-sans more valuable then, because they were taken over by Bullmark?
On the two that he put the picture up of, it would be, but there are going to be some Bullmark variations that will run you more than some of the standard Marisons. Again, without getting into Hawaii version, export version, and J-tail, there's going to be those are going to be the variations that are going to run the price up. But just for a standard Godzilla, yes, the Marison will be slightly more expensive because it was first.
That's a great question. That's a really good question. A lot of people had that in their minds to ask too. So, Mike, how about you? Your top 3 that you would recommend to a aspiring vintage collector?
Aspiring vintage collector. I'll share at least one of Sean's with a jumbo.
Cool.
The Poke Jumbo, the Japanese version, is definitely one of the best toys out there that you can probably get. The Bulmark Hedorah is another iconic piece. And I think it's actually, for me, it was my first piece that I actually got a Bulmark. It's actually a nice transition piece because even though it's a vintage sculpt, the sculpt is still kind of realistic enough that it's a nice way to transition because it's not as like Angulus. Bulmark is a biped instead of on all fours, and so there's some things in the marketing of the character sculpts that are different between Bulmark and some of the other figures that we tend to like. As far as the third one, I'd almost say a Bulmark tin, even though Sean will probably say something bad because I'm not really a big tin collector of tins. But there's still something, the coolness to that toy. And it's from that time period, the fact that it walks and smokes and does all this other kind of really cool stuff. So yeah, probably those 3 would be my
excellent.
Kind of
Excellent. Yeah, the tin I can't. My mind is not working today. What's the name of that exhibit that they had at G-Fest, Kyle? Downstairs?
Oh, the Peekaboo Galleries Vinyl Conflict.
They had some beautiful examples of tin pieces in that collection, and that was the first time I really got to see, pristine or near pristine, versions of those figures, and they're really impressive when you see them in person. They're big figures, and they're quite beautiful. And I think that those figures are a little bit beyond my range at this point because they are, I guess, pretty rare, and they can run you hundreds and hundreds of dollars, right, in good condition, especially with a box.
Yeah, if you want the box, which is also probably the coolest part of some of the artwork on the boxes.
Yeah, I love the box. Yeah,
you could probably find it between $500 and $800 without a box. Would be my guess for a Godzilla. Really that uncommon. And then you're getting into a grand plus once you start looking at different boxes. If you're staying with Bullmark, obviously the Marzon artwork boxes and so forth are going to start to be a lot more. But I'll defer to Sean if you actually want more accurate pricing information.
Well, again, you're putting this in perspective because a gigantic X Plus piece is about $500 to $800 after, especially if it's a gigantic that has a big giant box to ship in. So it's like people need to realize that I'm not saying don't get the X Plus gigantics; they're awesome too, but it's not that these are unattainable. If you can shell out the money for that, there's no reason why you can't. If you're so inclined after watching this episode to purchase a vintage piece, like a really amazing, good quality vintage piece, you can get one for about the price that you're paying for a gigantic with the shipping. So it just puts it all in perspective, and it might make it more, appealing for some collectors.
Well, if you look at the original retail on a tin, it was probably $10 to $15. So now you also look at the retail for an X Plus. Now, if you look at the X Plus on the secondary market, I mean, Biolante's jumped up to $2,000 for one of the crazy spikes in the period of the X Plus.
Wow.
I mean, so you spent $2,000 on it. To imagine what you could buy vintage that's actually was made for like whatever, probably $3 to $20 sometime 30 or 40 years ago.
Wow.
And obviously, if you're looking at an investment point, the vintage toys have actually increased a lot more. Where X Plus tends to spike with the demand, and then they do it, and then it drops. And then people move on to something else and they put more on the market and then the prices drop. There's just, I mean, I've never understood the X Plus market and some of the spikings on that market, but obviously.
Me neither.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of crazy. And like I said, the way that you guys are explaining this, that you can feasibly own an awesome vintage piece for the price of an X Plus figure. And and I think that's great. It's great. It's great for people to know that they can get one for a reasonable price.
Here's another question. This one's from Michael Farah from Kaiju Battle. Interesting question. He's asking if there's any figures produced by current companies like Diamond, NECA, current U.S. companies, I guess, that would be viewed in the same vein as classics like Bandai or X Plus in the future, I'm guessing. Like in Japan, I guess, right? So if you're in Japan, you can find American toys for sale, but they're not as prevalent, right, guys? Right, Mike and Sean?
Absolutely.
Do you have any
if he's
experience?
asking, are the NECA figures going to be considered classics in 25 years? To the kids growing up with them today, they very well might, but we can't answer that until 25 years have gone by. I can say that I think the NECAs are an incredible value. For you can go to Target or wherever and buy one for $20 or $25, and they have a lot of play value. They're great looking toys, far better looking than the toys that I had when I was a kid. So for that, I think they're awesome. It's very hard to say if they're going to be worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars in the future, but they have the hallmarks of the things that you would look for. They're great looking, they have great play value, they're accurate looking, they come in very cool boxes for the most part. So those are the things that tend to inspire nostalgia in the future. The kids go, man, I remember that NECA burning Godzilla or whatever, I want to get one. So all we can do is wait and see. But
all right. So it's funny. We actually had a question about the Maru-san. What does Maru-san mean? But Roger Hark Harvey already answered it. Maru-san, Maru Circle, San 3.
The 3 circles for the 3 founders. Not a triad. It's not a triad gang. It's just the 3 founders. And yeah, Maru-san was first. They were in operation long before they made Godzilla toys. They went out of business in '69. Bullmark started in '69 and lasted until the late '70s, about '78. But they only produced the vinyl figures until about '75 or '76. The last 2 years, they made some die-cast figures that are very nice looking and collectible in their own right. But they didn't make vinyl toys those last couple of years. It was just all the die-cast because that was the craze. And they've come back again now, and we're seeing new Maru-san and Bullmark re-releases and some original sculpts again. So, and for David about the 10, I agree. The Godzilla, basic Godzilla 10, there's Maru-san, there's Bullmark, there's a couple of different markings you can get on the foot, but 500 might be a little bit low, but definitely 600-700 you should be able to get one in good condition. I would be careful to make sure and check that the controller is an original. If it's lower price, it could have been replaced. But if that doesn't bother you, and as long as it works, then great. Save some money and get one that has a replaced controller. Not a big deal. That one, it tends to be, Gigan is the dream acquisition for the 10 collectors. I want to say that they used to sell for under 10,000. The one in the vinyl conflict last year sold for about 7,000, which I thought was a good price. The box was a little worn, might have contributed to keeping the price down. But the one that recently had the Mandrake auction was a beautiful dead stock box. It sold for about 17,000.
Whoa!
So the top end on that can be very high, but we're still lucky. When Mike was mentioning the most valuable vinyl toys, he mentioned Garamon first. Toho collectors are very lucky that we're not the Ultra Q collectors, because those sell for magnitudes greater. Garamon sold in the Mandrake auction for about the equivalent of 100,000. So we've got a long ways to go to catch the Ultraman collectors.
Yeah.
And good, because if it was all that expensive, we couldn't afford to collect anything. So.
Could I have a question? If I could, is there a holy grail that you're still looking for? It's just, should you mention it? Is there something?
Let's ask Mike first. He's been quiet for a little while. Mike, is there a holy grail you're still on the hunt for?
I mean, yeah, there's some figures that I want to complete my collection, like Sasha Healer. But yeah, the Holy Grail has kind of always been a weird term for me, because there's always something that's next on the horizon that I'm looking for, and that's my goal when I go on this trip to Japan, that this is what I hope that I can actually attain or find in a shop. But yeah, that's about it. There's not really anything except for that one that I'm really looking for at this point.
Come on, Mike. Red Minya. Admit it.
I've done him a couple times. I know what David said.
You can have mine. You can have mine, Mike. I'll give you mine.
No, yeah, I was hoping. I actually kind of assumed that stuff like that would have been more in that last Mandarake auction, and I was very disappointed to see that there really, outside of the tin toys, there really wasn't that many high caliber toys in that auction, at least as far as in my opinion of what I'm looking for. I mean, obviously the panoramic set was a nice toy, and some of the other things.
Did you get anything from that Zenbu auction that just ended last month?
Unfortunately, yes.
How about you?
Yeah, about a month to get them too. I know some people still even haven't been able to get their toys from that auction.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that auction. I don't want to get all negative. So yeah, no, I had a lot of I had a lot of problems in that auction. I actually had to go through it and actually figure a lot of it out. Yeah, no, I stayed away from it because the shipping was just a big unknown, and the commission on top of it, and all the prices were basically starting at what I would consider retail.
Right. Yeah.
Like I said, the panoramic set was nice, but it went for almost triple or double at least I think that it was worth.
Wow.
That's like obviously that tin was amazing. I don't know, is it called Christmas tin, Sean, or is that a holiday?
Oh, the Marathon? Yeah, the Marathon tin, that was made when Marathon changed to Marazan. This also happened that we didn't mention. So there was Marathon that was in business from the 50s into the 60s. They experienced a little bit downward turn in finances, and they rebranded themselves Marazan with a Z instead of an S, which for the Japanese, the way you would write it, of course, is just a couple of little dots over the symbol to change the name. And the items from Marazan tend to be much more difficult to locate than Marathon. So the differences in the soft vinyl figures is really none. They kept the same mold logo that was in there, but for the model kits and for the tin toys, they rebranded it with the Marazan, and so you're going to find them with a little bit different rebranding. And to celebrate that relaunch for the Godzilla figure, they released it in an edition of 80, and this is according to the Marazan founder. He gave us that number, so we believe it to be accurate, in a very garish, colorful form. And they had one in the last Mandarake auction. It sat for a while at a very low bid compared to the rarity, and then ended up, what did it go for, Mike? 32 or 33,000?
I thought it went into the 40s, but yeah, I didn't.
Wow.
Yeah, maybe with the commission afterwards, it might have been 40. Wow. So, but it sold for a significant price.
Jeez.
Wow.
But they're very, that one was with the box, and there's maybe 3 of them still with the box known. It's the ones they produced, not very many of them are still known to exist today.
Well, that Zenbu catalog itself is a pretty great thing. I'm glad I actually have it because it's a great resource. And it's just a great way to see some of these toys and paper products and all this other stuff. So I didn't bid on anything. I never intended to, but I just saw, actually it was John showed some images from the catalog. I'm like, oh, I need to get that. And I think for pretty reasonable price. And it's a beautiful resource to sort of see the toys and the header cards and all that kind of thing. So it's a nice cross section of the collecting world.
I agree. That's a good catalog, and really I'm going to toot this because I helped work on it. But the Vinyl Conflict catalog from last year, from the big auction that we had, the Lavolsi collection, probably has the best printed collection of vinyl products. If you're really looking for vintage, he had almost everything in there was included in that catalog. So between the two of those, you'd have a really good cross reference.
That's nice.
I ordered mine yesterday. I wish I had it by now.
The Vinyl Conflict one, John?
Yeah.
I got it from Amazon. They had it at the show for like a really good price. And well, those 2 catalogs will do until Club Tokyo comes back online. So, right?
Yeah, Mike.
What?
Mike and Rich.
He's just saying that, those 2 catalogs will do until Club Tokyo is back online. I'm just trying to feed you your prompts, dude.
People get paid for those catalogs.
That's a point. That's a good point.
That is a good point. Yeah.
Club Tokyo, I'm sure, is thankless work. Just kidding. We all thank you, Mike.
Yes, we do.
And Rich.
$200 a month. So
We love Club Tokyo.
And speaking of Bullmark and Marathon, let's give a shout out to Kyle for that dope opening of the Bullmark.
Yes.
How cool was that? That was such a nice
Great.
surprise. I
Love
love
that.
that.
I love vintage
Love it.
commercials, and
Yes.
especially if you can get toy commercials. And
Yeah.
trying to find them online is like fun but frustrating. And I'm about this close to
I was going to ask you
messaging.
that. How'd you find that?
Well, actually, the way I found those is I grabbed the names of toy companies in Japanese and I search YouTube with the word CM.
CM, yes.
CM is the basically the
Commercial.
shorthand for in Japanese for commercial. So that's how I've been finding those. But I'm about this close
Wow.
to asking Yuji to help me find any kind of vintage anything like vintage Bullmark, Marusan, etc., Nito, whoever, like commercials, paper goods, because as we were talking about Marusan earlier, and I've mentioned it in a couple of episodes, I did get to interview Eiji Kaminaga recently, and so we are probably going to do a cool history of Marusan video at some point. So
Excellent.
all that stuff would come into play really well for me. So if you're out there watching right now and you just have a stack of 35 millimeter commercials from
imagine?
Marusan or Bullmark, just get in touch with me, man. That's all I'm saying. All right, so I didn't really see too many more questions in the chat, but just because you asked about Grails, John, Demon by Design thought it would be fun to turn the question back onto you. Do you have a favorite vintage piece, or do you have a Grail piece that you're looking to find? I know you're actually kind of new to the whole vintage thing, but that's because I know you.
Yeah, I'm really turning back to vintage pieces. So the Jumbosaurus I really want to get, but shouldn't have said that out loud. One of my favorites while growing up was the Mattel Godzilla gang Godzilla, but I told the story of how mine was. I gave it to a friend who begged me. Oh, so I won't say how much I paid for this, maybe about 10 years ago, but I had to get the Poppy one back in my life. So everything else, well, this would be one of the things I would grab if I could just choose a couple figures in my collection. I did have another question if I could ask.
Of course
But
you
I
can
don't-
ask, dude. This
this
is a forum, my friend.
But I like not just the figures, but I'm like a book. I love the whole vintage books, the Showa books, and there's some stuff I would love to get, like even scripts, but they're like so hard to come by. Is there do you collect books, and if you do, what are some of your favorite vintage books? And
I'm going to pass that to Sean for you.
I do. And if I had known this question was coming, I would have prepped Kyle with a bunch of pictures.
Man.
I'd have to go off camera and reach over to the bookshelf to show you some old ones. But I love the old vintage art books that just have incredible pictures with fights that didn't happen that they imagined did. So when you get one of the old vintage books that has Godzilla fighting Ghidorah in it, you just go, wow, that's really cool. And Mogera fighting Mando or things of that nature. I think those are fantastic.
I was able to grab that book, Sean.
So there's mangas that go back into the 50s. There you go.
Yeah,
everybody remembers when Baragon and Dagora fought. That was one of the highlights of that movie.
Oh yes,
yeah. So, yes, when you see stuff like that, how can you not love it? And like that one that Kyle was holding up, again, it's surprisingly affordable to be a 50-year-old book that was made for kids and torn apart. And that one's going to come. The original ones, it's a hardbound. It comes with a little Sonosheet record that's a flexible record disc. It has a soundtrack that goes along with it. You can hear monster roars and stuff on it. You can find the hardcovers will tend to be more expensive than the soft covers. Most of them will be, I want to say, in the 100-ish range. There's a couple that reach into the high hundreds, but almost none of them touch 1,000, unless you go back to the 1950s ones. But when you're looking at those late 60s and 70s, most of those are released by Sonorama. We call them Sonosheets. They're surprisingly affordable. You can get the book and record sets. They're soft cover. for as little as $30 or $40 a lot of times, and again, maybe up to $100-ish for some of the hardcovers, a little bit higher for the rarer ones. So what a fantastic thing to collect. Everybody can afford $30 or $40 to add a 50-year-old vintage item to their collection that's a little bit different and something unique rather than just getting another figure of the week.
Indeed. There's one item I'm trying to find now, and I'm going to share it. Hope maybe it's
Don't jinx it, man. Don't jinx
I
it.
know. 'Cause I have one I just received from Kimono My House off of eBay, but it's not what I just wanted to have a piece of this old toy. They're called I think it's Kudu. It might be Kudu Poppy Kudu or Kudo Teddy Bee. But they're like little short movie clips that kids would pop into a player, and they have Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla.
Sure.
Yeah,
like a cartridge, like the viewfinder
cartridge.
cartridges.
And it's a video clip. So I missed out on one on Bai for Ultraman, but there's a Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla that I.
That's right up your alley. Yeah.
There's a projector around that same age too that they would use to show the clips. That comes in a beautiful art box that has King Ghidorah on the box itself. That's a really cool looking piece that you can be on the lookout for.
Have you ever come across them? I mean, like often, or well, I don't say often, but I mean, you've
Absolutely.
Wow, cool, cool. Gives me hope.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, this is the time right now where I'm going to ask my co-host if there's anything else you'd like to ask our guests. This is the time to ask them because we're at about an hour and 45 minutes, and I think it's probably time for us to get wrapped up on this. I'm going to go ahead and just say, Sean and Mike, whoever wants to answer, I have this. I thought it was a Godzilla gang, but I'm not sure if it's Godzilla gang or if it's Popey. Is there a discerning mark that would actually tell me if it was one or the other?
Well, the Godzilla gang figure is going to be made in Taiwan. If you hold them back up, looking at the mouth on that one, I think that is a Godzilla gang figure. The mold is actually different on the Japanese Popey one versus the American Godzilla gang figure.
Cool. Oh, I think we lost Christine. Anyway, yeah, I think I have the Godzilla gang then. That's great. Thanks, man.
Me too. This is my original one that I got in the 70s when I was a kid. So.
I envy you.
Me too. I never knew that existed in the 70s. Like I would have been all over that if I knew that existed in the 70s. I mean,
I can remember going to the store, buying this, looking at the rest of the figures in the line, and thinking, "What the heck are they? I don't want any of them."
Yeah. So that's the one thing that I would say is I remember. Like, I didn't know Godzilla movies when I was a kid growing up and the Godzilla gang was in the stores. But I remember going to the store and Marucci was the only one they had. Mm-hmm. Now, this is I don't own any of my original pieces from when I was a kid. But just to go ahead and, do what Demon by Design asked and said, like, if any of the other hosts want to chime in, this was my kaiju figure when I was a kid. Like, this is nostalgically synonymous with giant monsters, even though I had never ever seen this monster as a kid and I had no idea who any of the other monsters were in the Godzilla gang, and I barely knew who Godzilla was. And I mean, if this for Sean and Mike, if they care, my Rodan figure was the only kaiju figure that I like wish that I had from my childhood. It's actually was a gift from a friend of mine who got it for me, but it's like that Shogun Warriors Rodan is definitely hands down my favorite vintage piece. David, what's your favorite vintage piece you own?
Well, the only vintage piece like you that I had from my childhood, as Sean knows, there wasn't much available back then, and this was the only one that I had. This is it, the beautiful 1969 glow in the dark Godzilla square box Aurora kit. And I actually had two. I had the 69 box, and then I had the 72 box because I broke the first one, bringing it to the beach, playing with it in the sand. Wow. And I kept losing pieces. And I still have the original kit that I built. Well, actually, my father built. I'm not going to say I did. I micromanaged. my dad built the pieces, and my mother painted them for me. I since repainted it. I stripped it and repainted it, but I should have left it the way it was now that I think about it. But anyway, it's the figure is intact except for he's missing one hand that I got from the Polar Lights reissue, and the little nameplate Godzilla on the base is from the Polar Lights reissue. So, and the interesting thing about this kit is this was the inspiration, or actually the long box that is the first release was the inspiration for the Marusan soft vinyl Godzilla, and that's why they look so similar, because this one was actually first. And yeah, I never really wanted the Imperial Godzilla. It didn't really appeal to me too much, and I didn't want the Mattel Godzilla because to me it didn't look like Godzilla that much. The Rodan was pretty cool. I never really saw that one, but you got to understand there was nothing available. I mean, when I was a kid, like in the mid 70s, there was nothing. There was really nothing. This one I got later in life, but I found out that this Yamakatsu was sold at Spencer gift stores and malls in the 80s, in the late 70s and early 80s. I got mine at I think it was probably Forbidden Planet in New York City. But I was just talking to a friend about this, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I got mine at Spencer Gifts." And I'm like, I never saw that at Spencer Gifts. All I saw was those glasses that when you put cold beverages in it, the lady's top sort of became invisible, and black light.
I was not allowed to go into Spencer's Gifts in the 70s.
Oh, you were too. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a naughty store, and incense and black light posters, and I guess Yamakatsu Godzillas if you're in certain regions of the U.S. But South Jersey, we sadly didn't get that. But yeah, this was it for me. And as far as my favorite goes, real quick, Kyle knows the story. Got this, my very first vintage piece not at Mandarake, but at Nakano Broadway, in a shop around the corner that was a Japanese antique store. I cannot remember the name of it. It's since closed. I'm sorry to hear. But they had a couple of vintage figures in there, and I picked this guy up, my very first piece, in Japan by myself. Everybody else was in Mandarake. I went alone. I went shopping, veered off from the crew, picked this guy up, and I'm pretty stoked to have it. So my first and my favorite.
Awesome.
Excellent. All right. Well, unfortunately, we have lost Christine because I guess she fought her way out of Godzilla's mouth and ziplined back out over to New York. But, honestly, we're pretty much wrapped up here anyway. I would like to take this opportunity to actually wrap up the show and say thank you to everybody who watched live. It was really great to see basically the same crowd that we've been seeing show up for another one of these group chats. Thank you so much to Sean Linkenback and Mike Johnson for being here with us and telling us all about the land of vintage vinyl kaiju figures and more. And, we are going to have more of these group chats as we continue going and so forth. There's Christine.
I'm back.
You're back just in time for us to do our outro stuff.
All right.
It's all good. It's all good. We're fine. Godzilla doesn't care. All right. So, again, thank you guys so much for watching live. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you to my co-hosts for doing this. And thanks. Please remember to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button if you had a good time watching the show today.
And if you want to continue this conversation, check us out on our new Facebook group, Collect All Monsters, where we can talk about things that we didn't get to say on the show. We can all, continue the conversation, and you too can be a Collect All Monsters monster collector.
Yeah, don't keep us a secret. Make sure you share with your fellow collectors and kaiju fans. We can all join together and share our awesome experiences together.
Absolutely.
And if you're not catching us live, let us know what you liked and what you saw, and any questions in the comments on it when you get to watch the episodes.
All right. So until next time, our planet may be doomed, our Earth devastated, the monsters are in revolt, and civilization is in chaos. We must unite and collect all monsters. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fun show.
Thank you so much.